One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of The Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. I'm Mitch Mason, joined by Joseph Hoyt of the Dallas Morning News. And Joseph, I really appreciate you jumping on. It's a thrill to get to talk to you.
Of course, Mitch. Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, today, Joseph, we are talking about two of our favorite topics here. Of course, we're a North Texas-based pod, so we've talked SMU, but we're going to be talking SMU football in a minute. First, we've got to get an update on what is going on with the Pac-12. You know, we just found out the news that San Diego State is now considered in good standing once again with the Mountain West. They had previously tried to exit that with what we're reportedly being told, kind of confidence that they were going to get into the Pac-12. So over these last few months, we've watched the Pac-12 continue to push back their media rights deal time and time again. You tweeted just a couple of days ago, maybe even yesterday, we were promised in February that this was coming soon. And here we are at the end of July, and we still are being told it's coming soon. So first and foremost, what are you hearing on what the Pac-12 is trying to do from a media rights standpoint? And what does that mean for a school like SMU that has long been rumored to have ties to the Pac-12?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and me both would like to know what's going on, right? Well, it's been a long time. I've been kind of tweeting the "it's been 84 years" GIF from Titanic a lot, just to kind of capture the feelings. You even had today San Diego State's one of their own players at Mountain West Media Day saying, "Hey, we were told a year ago that this was going to happen, that we were going to go to the Pac-12." Now they're kind of sitting in this like, "Hey, we're staying in the Mountain West, but like maybe we also will still go to the Pac-12 depending on what the buyout and the terms of media deal might be." It's Mitch, it's extremely complicated. And if someone put it to me this way, if it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. And now everyone's kind of wondering, well, what exactly is going on? Is this, hey, we're just buttoning up things and, we're under no pressure to announce a deal yet? Or is it, hey, we're going to wait out, try to get, a little last minute, bargaining, maybe, push two different people to, really negotiate against each other and ultimately see what the best deal is? I kind of characterized it as, hey, this kind of feels like, the Pac-12 is going for it on 4th and long with the game on the line here. And they could have either just punted or they're going for it. So they're either going to look like a genius or a scapegoat when it's all said and done. And, from an SMU perspective, I think it's fascinating because we've seen the two favorites for the Pac-12 kind of play this differently and for different reasons. San Diego State's been kind of public, hey, we're going to resign from the Mountain West. We got a month left. And that was obviously due to the fact that, they had a deadline on a buyout that kind of forced their hand a little bit. SMU, meanwhile, they already know what the exit fee would probably be to get out of the American. We saw that with Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati recently. So they're kind of just sitting back and saying, hey, we're going to let this play out. We've done our due diligence. We've done our work. And we're in no rush to really make this a thing. And I think, from an SMU perspective, there's also kind of an eye on, hey, what are the other conferences going to do? Obviously, I think their first priority, for the last decade has been, hey, let's get in the Big 12. Let's reunite with the Southwest Conference. And obviously some schools around the Big 12, I don't think are too keen on that happening and on allowing SMU back in. So, hey, what's the AAC going to, or what's the ACC, going to do? Hey, would the Big 10 ever have interest in getting into Texas? I think, they want the Pac-12 that it's kind of right there. But as things go on, it kind of makes you wonder, what else could happen or what else could be afoot.
Do you feel like SMU may have dodged a bullet by not being, accepted to the Pac-12 a couple of months ago when SMU to the Pac is trending on Twitter? You've got, everybody and their mom who, reps the Ponies pushing for this addition to our westernmost conference. And yet, folks like me who didn't go to SMU, but will certainly root for the Ponies, were saying, I don't know if this would be the best thing for the athletic department to kind of tie their reputation to right now. Do you feel like they've dodged a bullet, or do you feel like that would still be a step in the right direction for SMU long term?
I think it would be a step in the right direction, but it's funny you asked that, because I think my most ridiculed column I've ever wrote at the Dallas Morning News was a column I wrote probably about a month after George Kliavkoff visited, saying like, hey, there's overwhelming positives to a move to the Pac-12. It's kind of finally getting back to a Power 5 conference for SMU. But if there's one thing to consider, it is the future of the Pac-12. And, that meant, hey, I'm an Oregon alum. So I know, Oregon, Washington, initially when USC and UCLA departed, said, hey, what about us? We kind of want to be in on this. So what is their future, and what is the future of the four corner schools, as we've, seen play out publicly, between Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State? What's the point of getting out of the American and paying an exit fee to do so if you're going to join a fragile conference? And I think, that's one thing that this kind of, as time has gone by, is maybe reinforced, is the idea that, hey, I don't know if those four corner schools actually want to go. You'd think that maybe they had that opportunity, or maybe they feel no rush and they strictly want to see what type of deal the Pac-12 can get before they leave, because, hey, they like it there. And if it's equal or right around what the Big 12 is getting, then maybe it's not worth trying to get out of it. So, to answer your question, long answer short, I don't know if they dodged a bullet, as much as they kind of are learning a little bit more about what the Pac-12 might look like in the future. And I think it might be the same answer that it was months ago, but it's kind of reinforcing what maybe they hoped it would be, because, hey, none of those schools have left yet. And I think that's something that is on the minds of people around the Pac-12.
That's a great point. I mean, that was one of the things that I was pointing to a couple of months ago as well, is, hey, you don't know, or at least what we don't think what these four corner schools might do, what Oregon, what Washington might do. And I think the lack of action on those six schools' part is telling, at least to this point, that, hey, as shaky as the media might paint the Pac-12, and, I'm certainly at the front of the line kind of questioning, is the Pac-12 going to survive long term? But at the same time, there has not been this mass exodus, and that is a point in the Pac-12's favor. Last question about it, because it was such a stir here in the North Texas area when Kliavkoff came to SMU's campus. Was there ever a point, either during that visit or shortly after, where you and those SMU insiders kind of felt like, okay, it's here, it's happening?
I think everyone in the arena thought that, to be honest, because it was so unique, Mitch, to have the, shadowy realignment, back alley kind of conversation so public. I mean, think about this. People had heard things, but Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, when that happened, bombshell.
Yeah.
When USC and UCLA, when it happened, bombshell. Now the Pac-12 is kind of meeting publicly and courting publicly with, SMU, and then it later came out San Diego State. That doesn't happen. And I think the interesting thing about the Kliavkoff visit was the fact that news broke before it happened. And if he wanted to, he didn't have to come. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to kind of put himself in this kind of watching, it was almost like a zoo a little bit, where it's like, hey, everyone can see up there in the suite, there's Rick Hart, the athletic director of SMU, there's George Kliavkoff, and everyone just look and watch, kind of like a zoo exhibit. And, I think then the night of, it was like, hey, maybe this is going to happen soon. But I was told pretty quickly, hey, this is not a coronation. This is a due diligence trip, kind of on a long road of things. And I was told nothing is coming. Now, Mitch, I didn't think it would be this long, to be honest. But I guess that was kind of part of it, was they were doing their due diligence, and they continue to do so. But I think because it was so public, it made not only media people think, but it made SMU fans think, hey, SMU, the Pac-12 is legit. This is a thing. And with every passing month, it kind of comes in the back of your head, like, is this actually going to happen?
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I think at the time I likened it to, catching your significant other on a date with somebody else and then expecting, everyone just to stay together. And oh, don't worry about that. We're fine. It was interesting to watch that news break and then he still show up and you have all the, the grainy photos and the side angles. Nobody could really get, the perfect picture, but it was a little surreal watching all of that happen. So I appreciate your insight into all of that. It's a fascinating topic. I know that story continues to develop. Like you said, we didn't think it would take this long, but it is, and here we are. And yet SMU still remains in the American, and that's where we'll go next. 2023 preview for SMU. We're in the middle of preview season right now. It's a little early for us to get to the group of 5 discussion, but SMU is such an interesting team because despite going 7-6 last year and certainly having a lot of fun on offense and maybe not so much fun on the defensive side, they look like they are reloading not only through the transfer portal, but also just through high school recruiting and becoming a team that is certainly on the rise. So we'll get into the offense and the defense, but overall, as you look at this team getting ready for the season here in just a couple of weeks, what are kind of your overall expectations for SMU? What's the temperature on campus and around Dallas about the Ponies?
Yeah, I think my expectations, and I think the expectations of many people are high for SMU. I think when you look at this roster, they recruited ultimately, especially via the transfer portal, at a Power 5 level. And I think that there are feelings that this SMU team is a Power 5 team masquerading in a Group of 5 conference this year. And not only that, SMU plays, in the American, which you'd think, hey, Tulane is going to be, they beat USC, so they should be really good again. UTSA coming up from Conference USA, they should be another team that's going to be really competing for a conference title. Oh, wait, SMU doesn't play either of them this year in the regular season. Obviously they will likely play one of them in the conference title game whenever that comes. But the fact that they don't have to means that they can go undefeated in conference play. And I personally, that's kind of the expectation. I think their toughest game is at Memphis. They've got a short week game at East Carolina, which is kind of interesting. But if you look at those two teams, there's not, really anything to suggest that SMU shouldn't be favored in both of those games. And so I think SMU clearly has questions to them. Hey, new quarterback, that always is a thing. But then again, the quarterback you're turning to is a former high school All-American that chose SMU over Texas out of high school and has been waiting his turn. And mind you, threw a 75-yard touchdown on the first play of his starting career. So I think there's a lot of high expectations for Preston Stone as well. And if he can kind of make this thing go, then they have weapons on offense that suggest that they have a Power 5 caliber top 10 offense. And defense, they, through the transfer portal, revamped pretty much everywhere, especially in the secondary, which was a weak point last year.
Yeah.
The fact that you can add a 4-year starter from a Power 5 school like Stanford and Jonathan McGill, I think kind of speaks to what they were able to do in the transfer portal.
Yeah, it's been incredible to watch. And I think at one point, I've forgotten how many days in a row or if there was a break in that, but it felt like you were breaking, hey, this guy is now transferring to SMU. This guy is transferring to SMU. This kid has committed to SMU, enrolling early. The Ponies were on a serious roll. And for whatever reason, there appears to be some link, some fast track from Miami to here in Dallas. What on earth has Coach Lashley and that staff presented to, kids that go into the portal out of Miami that they're like, yep, Dallas, the 214, we're coming?
Yeah, obviously being at Miami helps. They had such a great relationship with them. And, I think the funniest example is Keyshawn Smith, a receiver they added from Miami, a California kid. He's a guy that it was either him or it was the other Miami receiver they added. Long story short, Rob Likens, the wide receiver coach at SMU, is a very tough and lovable guy, but you can see the toughness. And I think for some people that might not be the most enjoyable experience to be coached by someone tough. And he was blown away that one of the receivers said, yes, I want to be coached by you again, because I think that, I can do really good with you and you can get the most out of me. I think if you look at Jalen Knighton, for example, Rooster Knighton, that's a guy who excelled. He had some fumbles at Miami, but he excelled with Rhett Lashley, especially from a, catching out of the backfield perspective and running the ball. So I think, when I asked him, like, hey, were there other options out of the portal? And he said, I just want to go reunite with Coach Lashley. And if Dallas was good, Dallas was good. And so he was in. And obviously the rest of the guys kind of came after that too. So I think one of the things you'll find, Mitch, in this transfer portal era is that, hey, if that coach had a relationship with a player out of high school or college, I mean, it's something that SMU is trying to do in the transfer portal. They're trying to recruit ahead of the transfer portal by saying, hey, Colin Simmons, you're, a top 5 recruit in the country, 5-star player from Duncanville right down the street. You're probably going to go somewhere else, right? But hey, come on an official visit, see what it looks like. And maybe one day, if you want to come back home, you can come here. And I think that they've done that with so many players that it's kind of becoming a constant. And I think it'll be a yearly thing where every year it's, hey, and the transfer portal opens, let's see which former Dallas kid's going to come back to SMU. And that's kind of the hope that they have here.
I think it's such a brilliant strategy, and one that you're starting to see some schools kind of catch on to, right? There are a lot of stories of kids either coming back home or going after, a position coach, someone that recruited them along their way. But SMU seems to be doing it at such an elite level. You mentioned Colin Simmons, who's the top edge player, edge recruit in the 2024 class. Joseph, I don't know if you know this. I'm the color broadcaster for Duncanville Radio, so I had a front row seat to Colin last season during their state title run. And to see SMU earn a seat at that table when everyone else wants to talk about LSU or Texas or Oregon or Texas A&M seems to be getting some momentum as of late. And yet SMU, like you mentioned, earned an official visit. They've got him tweeting, hometown hero, hometown kid. He may not come to SMU, but that still, I think, leaves a decent impact with other kids looking at SMU. And like you said, you never know what could happen. You have, kids like LJ Johnson, who is a top running back recruit, didn't work out at Texas A&M, didn't love the fit there, comes to SMU and seems like, at least from the clips that I saw during the spring, looks like he could be a lot of fun for the Ponies. So I think it's brilliant what SMU is doing. And I'm really interested to see how they dominate this season. So with that in mind, let's get into it. You mentioned Preston Stone, kind of the long-awaited first full starting season for Preston here in 2023. You mentioned he picked SMU over Texas, a hometown kid. The talent is undeniable. What are your expectations for him this season? And how far do you think that he realistically can carry this team in his first year? I know you mentioned that going undefeated in conference play is realistic, but is an 11-1, is a 12-0 even on the table for SMU this year?
I think the good thing for Preston is that he doesn't have to carry things. And I think, it's so funny because you start talking about SMU's offensive weapons, right? It's like, hey, Keyshawn Smith, Jordan Curley, Romello Brinson, these guys that were Power 5 transfers that come in. And then, like, I always forget, it's like, oh, what about Moochie Dixon from Texas, who all he did last year, he didn't have maybe the most quantity of catches, but if you look at the quality of catches, they were insane. And then I didn't even mention Roderick Daniels, another Duncanville guy who is kind of they're hoping to be obviously two different guys. They're trying that he's the Debo Samuel of their offense in terms of, hey, let's put him in the backfield, and then let's also split him out wide, and let's kind of use him as a motion kind of gadget nightmare for some of these defenses in man coverage. So long story short, with Preston, he doesn't have to carry things, and I think that's something that could be interesting to watch, because if you look at Parrish, he kind of was carrying things. He was Johnny Manziel out there. He was he was leading them to 4 state titles. He was incredible, and I think now it's kind of, hey, make some plays in the pocket, but just get the ball out to your weapons and let them run. And I think the expectation's undefeated in conference play. And I think that a lot of SMU fans are hoping, hey, they pull off an upset and beat OU or TCU? Not easy games at all by any means. And probably games I won't pick SMU to win. But hey, you never know. What if this team is that good? And I think that it all comes back to Mitch. They got to actually do it, right? But expectations and hopes are very high this year for SMU.
I love to hear it. I love to hear it. You talked about some of the weapons out wide. You've talked about Jalen Knighton in the backfield. Tyler Levine is back as well. So I mean, it's scary hours if you're trying to play defense against this Mustangs team. Tell me a little bit about the offensive line. A lot of transfers coming in. That is going to be a key area of focus, especially as the offense looks to get rolling early. Stone looks to settle in as the starting quarterback. What should we expect in the trenches there from the big uglies?
Yeah, no, I think there should be some good competition this fall camp. They got a couple guys coming in, and Logan Parr and Hiron White was there. I can't think of his name right now because there's just so many transfers on the scene, but they got from Miami, who was a starting center at Miami. He's going to compete with Branson Hickman.
Yeah, Ja'Kai Clark.
Thank you. They have Hiron White, who is literally called the bomb shelter because of how big he is. They even added a guy like PJ Williams from Texas A&M, who was kicked off the team at A&M, kind of gets a new start here at SMU and is a 5-star offensive lineman. I can't remember the last time SMU had a 5-star offensive lineman, whether it even be via the transfer portal or not. So I don't expect him to be a guy that plays this year on it. Aside from maybe as a injury replacement, but they have a lot of competition coming back. And I didn't even mention Justin Osborne, who had off-season surgeries, hoping to get healthy before the start of this season. He's kind of one of those anchors. And so is Marcus Bryant, who, between him and Hiron White, SMU might have the tallest bookend tackles, not only in Group of Five, but in the country. These are two 6'8" dudes. Not going to be easy to get around, and they should kind of give plenty of protection for Preston Stone.
Yeah, nothing is more humbling than walking into a media availability and having the guys walk by you, and you're just looking up at a skyscraper. Some of us were blessed with height, some of us were not, and I'm in the latter camp, so I understand that. Take me to the defense then. So the offense is going to put up a lot of points, but Joseph, they did that last year, right? The offense was 2 thumbs up for most of the season. They were a ton of fun to watch. Tanner Mordecai had a whale of a season, and yet they went 7-6. Really, when you look back at it, there were so many missed opportunities on defense, so many times where big play just couldn't be met. You talked about the secondary off the top. What has SMU done to improve the secondary? What do you think we can kind of expect in the back end?
Yeah, I think if you look at SMU's biggest weakness last year, it was kind of twofold. And it was kind of the secondary as a whole, which actually probably did improve a little bit from the year before. A lot of similar guys, but still wasn't that great, all things considered. But I think collectively at all levels, I think their tackling was really bad last year. All you have to do is go watch the film from that Thursday night, one of those good nights in New Orleans in the cold against Tulane, when all they did was just run it down their throat constantly. I think Michael Pratt threw the ball 6 times that game because they could not tackle anyone from Tulane. And I think, in terms of football, tackling issues, obviously there's fundamentals behind it, but I think a big thing is kind of experience level. Do these guys have experience bringing down other guys constantly over and over, right? And what did SMU do? They went out and added a secondary's worth of players that combined for over 48 career starts. There's just a lot of experience now in that back level all of a sudden. Whether it's Charles Woods, who's now, played at multiple places, or Jonathan McGill, as I mentioned. They have, or Chris Mekinson, from Liberty, who also reunites with Scott Simons, just as Ahmad Walker does. Mm-hmm. So I think that tackling is probably going to be their biggest area of improvement. Obviously, I think it was a low bar, but if they can kind of tackle better this year and kind of just keep players in front of them, then maybe that'll allow that kind of high octane offense to really take off. So that's kind of where I'm expecting, them to be this year. And I think, Scott Simons, the defensive coordinator, he came from Liberty with a lot of high expectations, and kind of a guy that's been rising through the career ranks really quickly. a former Hearst LD Bell guy, so he's a local guy.
Yep.
And last year, I don't think went as well as anyone really hoped. But I also think that this year Simons was able to really go out and get players in the transfer portal that he wanted, guys that fit his system, literally guys that played for him back at Liberty. And I think that, with some of the transfer portal additions, you'll really see a big improvement on this SMU defense, specifically with tackling.
Mm-hmm. Well, take me a step closer to the defensive line, which we'll finish out with. You mentioned Ahmad Walker coming over from Liberty. Kobe Wilson transfers in from Temple as well. Tackling was such an issue last year. How important is it going to be to see guys like Walker, like Wilson, take this SMU linebacking core, which base out of a 4-2-5 normally? How important is their role in this year when, yes, the schedule seems very, very workable, and yet if you mess around, play with your food, you can end up with some losses on that schedule?
Well, I think linebacker is probably the most interesting place on defense because they lost a lot of starters. I mean, they lost everyone pretty much, you know what I mean? And so they had to hit the portal hard, and they did. You mentioned two guys right off the top right there. And I think that, they have Jaquandis Burns, who's going to be stepping up this year. And he made some interesting plays in spring camp that kind of like made you go, ooh, that was really impressive. So he, a former Minnesota guy, a 4-star talent himself. I think that there's going to be some high hopes for him, but there should be good competition too. I think Maurice Crum, in his first year at SMU, coaching those linebackers, has got some interesting players. And I think the interesting one, and I think we all want to fall in love with freshmen. They're always kind of the apple of the eye, but yeah. I think Alex Kilgore, whether it's this year or whether it's next year, I think that he'll be a player for SMU. He's very impressive. Everyone talks highly of him. It was pretty evident in his first spring as a early enrollee out of Katy Paytow. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny. He wears 54 for Fred Warner, or that's one of his inspirations. And all I see is, I'm a California guy, native growing up. All I see is Fred Warner when I watch him play. And
wow.
Just that kind of athleticism, that kind of side to side, but, still big enough. So, again, I don't know if it's this year for Alex Kilgore, but that's someone who everyone speaks very highly of when they get to see him play.
Yeah. Last thing, take me to the trenches on the defensive side. So the running game, or the running defense rather, last year was not very good. Still not a huge defensive line for SMU. You don't have a ton of those big bodies in there. They do get a transfer in from Miami, and I'm blanking on his name, Jordan Miller, who's a big cat. What do you expect the strength of this defensive line to be? Would it be the interior, or do you think it's going to be more off the edge, the pass rush, that you would give the advantage to?
So it's funny because, we've been talking this entire podcast about why we think SMU should have high expectations, right? And we've kind of gone through position by position. And a lot of this is transfer portal induced. It's, hey, we'll actually see it. We'll see how these guys actually play in the system, once the season starts. And I think that's a big question with SMU. Hey, you have the hype, but what does it actually look like? But Mitch, we're going through all these positions, and there's really not a lot of holes. And I think this defensive line is another one. The depth, the perceived depth on this defensive line is incredible. And if you watch spring camp, spring ball, the defensive line dominated spring. I thought that was the story of the spring ball, was how good the defensive line looked. Like you said, they got Jordan Miller, who at 6'3", 315, with a decent amount of experience from Miami. He's a grad transfer. That's a guy that doesn't really come to SMU. And Elijah Roberts is someone who very talented, another Miami transfer, 6'4", 275, and someone that, the former Miami coaches who are now at SMU, they said that, hey, man, he came here with a chip on his shoulder. And it was pretty evident in spring ball. And it's funny, you start going down, you start naming names. I haven't even named Corey Robertson coming over from Oklahoma.
Sure.
Devere Levelson, who's been an all-conference player for them back-to-back years and has really high expectations. Oh, yeah, and then Elijah Chapman at nose tackle, who might literally be the strongest player in college football. He's back as well. So I think, especially on the interior defensive line, they should be good. I think on the edge, they've got a lot of talent, and we'll see if someone really steps up and kind of takes over that really dominant kind of get after the quarterback role. I've been singing the praises of Nelson Paul the last 2 years, and I think that he's a player that kind of is on the verge of popping. He's kind of should be their go-to edge rusher this year. So I think that he's someone to keep an eye on. But Jalen Samuels, when he comes back, from suspension, I think that that's a guy who's just dripping in talent. So long story short, there's not a lot of holes on this team. And if you look at their defensive line specifically, there's a lot of potential depth. And I think that kind of is just the encompassing thing about SMU this year. Not a lot of perceived holes, a lot of perceived depth, a lot of perceived talent. Can they actually do it? And I think that's something that we'll actually just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, so Joseph, as we get ready to wrap this up, say they do it. They go 10-2, they go 11-1. They're in contention, or they go on and secure a New Year's Six bowl berth. As the playoffs expand in 2024, where does that put SMU kind of in the pecking order of the group of 5 teams, right? There's all this talk about, hey, the group of 5 is finally going to have a seat at the table. If a team like SMU were to build to a point where they own a seat at that table every year, is that realistic for this program, assuming they don't go join the Pac-12, assuming for whatever reason they stay group of 5? Could they be a program that locks down a spot in the playoff every year?
I think in the back of their minds, if the Pac-12 doesn't work out, that's the thing that they'll be telling themselves is, hey, why don't we just do really well in the Pac or in the American? Why don't we be the group of 5 Gonzaga for football and just be the team that's in the playoffs every single year? And then eventually maybe the ACC wants to expand, or the Big Ten wants to expand, and we've all of a sudden become kind of what Boise State was like, a decade ago.
Yeah.
A decade and a half ago, man, I feel old. But I think that's something in the back of their mind is, and I think ideally this is probably the plan they hoped was, hey, make a New Year's Six bowl this year with a weak conference schedule, kind of ride the momentum of that, then make the CFP the next year, ride the momentum of that, and then start in the Pac-12 in 2025. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you have Power 5 momentum on top of that. Because I think, SMU fans, coaches, whatever it may be, will tell you, if you give us a Power 5 label, we'll be able to keep the Colin Simmonses in Dallas, which, obviously is on a person-by-person basis. And I'm not saying that if they were Power 5 this year, Colin Simmons would go there. But I think that that's their hope is, hey, give us a Power 5 label. We'll win some of these recruiting battles that are just kind of out of our league because they're not in the right league. So I think – it's funny, Mitch. I've done a lot of preview stuff for SMU this offseason, and kind of the cynical journalist in me is like, hey, man, you're singing the praises too much of a team that hasn't done it yet. So I feel the need to reinforce that, hey, I have high expectations for them. I think the standard is really high, and there's reason for it, but they do got to go out and do it. And I think that, that's something we'll find out in fall. They'll get a really good look September 9th in Norman to see exactly where they are from a program standpoint. So it'll be interesting.
It will be interesting. We're really excited about SMU here on the 3 Tech Pod, not just because we're here in North Texas, but I think because of what we project them to be. They're going to be, I think, one of the most interesting programs to watch here in the country. Joseph, really appreciate you jumping on with us. This has been a blast. We'll keep it peeled to your social media for any SMU to the Pac-12 news. Probably going to be pestering you for a final score prediction when SMU does go to Norman. I think that is going to be one of the biggest games for a lot of the futures. I mean, gosh, if SMU is able to go win that, stock up on SMU at such an exponential level. If OU loses that game, you're gonna have a lot of questions, I think, as the Sooners get ready to head into the SEC. But really appreciate you jumping on. We have a lot of SMU fans, a lot of North Texas people. Let them know where they can find you over on your social media.
Yeah, Joe J. Hoyt on Twitter. I have an Instagram. I have a Threads, that you can just find by searching. But to be honest, I got to be better about posting on those because Twitter's kind of dominated me. Elon's got me in his grasp, and I can't let go. So, follow me there and subscribe to the Dallas Morning News. Football season means a lot of content coming. I've had a little bit of a nice break, between covering the Stars and now as media days pick up. But yeah, follow me there, and it should be a really fun season. Should be a lot to watch for.
Yeah, for those of you who are in Texas and care about SMU, North Texas sports news, Joe is one of the best. I've followed him for quite some time, and you will certainly enjoy the content that he puts out. Joseph, we'll catch up with you soon. Best of luck this season, and thanks again for the time.
Of course, Mitch. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. This has been another edition of the 3 Tech Pod. Be sure, if you're new, subscribe on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, or over on YouTube. If you're watching this, we are growing over there as well. Until next time, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how about